Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the NHLN Opinion Plus, a weekly series airing every Friday. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions that Latino community is curious about. Today, we are joined by Michael Haley Goldman, Executive Director for New Hampshire Humanities. Welcome, Michael. Nice to have you with us today.
Thanks, Brian. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's the start of the year, so lots of new possibilities, and just looking forward to figuring out what's next.
And absolutely, and a lot of excitement. So we're going to jump in with a couple questions. Any questions before we begin?
No, just go ahead and fire away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, I just want to start off by asking, how has the pandemic impacted you within the work that you've been doing with New Hampshire Humanities, and how has that impacted it in terms of the programs and the resources that you've been offering in terms of humanities to New Hampshire?
Well, it's a great question, and I'm able to answer it a little bit based off the fact that I've got a great team here at New Hampshire Humanities. I'm relatively new myself, and I only arrived back in September. So a lot of the work that was done in response to the pandemic happened before I got on board. The organization did have a lot of the same problems that everyone else had, which is not only moving the staff into remote work, but a lot of the work that we do in terms of programming is done as on-site programs. These are programs in your local library, programs where in a humanities center somewhere, like on a college campus. So that had to all move online, and the team did a really great job of moving things into web-based humanities programming. The other piece that is worth mentioning is that another big impact of the work we do is how we support humanities organizations across the state. And we were a conduit for funding for humanities programs and organizations all around New Hampshire. So money from the CARES Act, money from the SHARP Act, all came through us and out to organizations in your own communities all around New Hampshire.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Michael. And so, with that being said, because you focus on everything about human nature and about people just trying to promote DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, just create an environment where people are accepting of new cultures. Can you explain on how have the events of social injustice, especially within 2020 and afterwards, how has that impacted the way that you work with marginalized communities within New Hampshire?
Well, one of the important pieces that's always been there, I think, for humanities work is humanities has an obligation to really put the spotlight on voices that aren't being heard within our society. That's something that's always been there, but the urgency of that obviously has increased in the last couple of years. So it's something that we have always tried to do, is support the kinds of programming within history, within literature, within all the different humanities fields that brings out voices that aren't being heard. So I don't know that I would say that the process itself has changed, but the urgency certainly has.
Absolutely. And so can you explain more of what type of programs or what type of changes have you made in order to make sure that these marginalized groups are getting the same resources and are getting the same amount of success as their majority counterparts?
Well, there are two different ways that goes on, and it's certainly not something that is perfected. It's something that we actually would love a lot of feedback on and get a sense of. One is that we are a supplier of grant funding for humanities programs around the state, and one of the big questions we've had, especially as we were looking to distribute funding in support of humanities programs under the pandemic conditions, was equity of access. Do people know about these kinds of programs? Do people have access to them? Do people know how to apply, and do they actually apply for the funds is a big issue. And that's something that we are trying to pay closer attention to. We got a lot of people applying for fundings through pandemic needs that hadn't applied with us before. And that means that there are people out there that we're not reaching, and we need to do better with that. And we're talking about how to make our application process easier and to make knowledge about the kind of programs that we can fund broader. So it's one of the reasons it's really great to be here with you today. Actually, it's another opportunity to get the word out about that. The other thing is to really try to talk about the kind of programs that we do. One of the big series that was run in 2020 was a series called Black Thought. And that was one that was really directly in response to trying to center voices that hadn't been heard through the community. All of that material, this was one of the advantages of the pandemic and moving everything online, is that all of that material has been recorded and is on our website. So we're really trying to do more programs like that talk about different perspectives and be able to highlight that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's, I mean, really interesting that you're focused, that you're trying to equip everybody with the same amount of resources and the same and offer the same quality. But I'm also curious, can you explain more like what type of obstacles do Latinx, Black, and people and communities of color face within New Hampshire in terms of accessing your resources and still achieving the same amount of success, whether that be getting a full-time offer or going to college or simply going out of the traditional norm of not of simply not getting a job or not going to college?
Well, so there's a couple of different. I can't claim to be an expert on the situation for different communities within New Hampshire. Again, having just arrived, but I think there's a general question around access. A lot of the way that we support humanities work is in the state is through other organizations, and where those organizations do and don't have access to their own resources becomes a barrier. If you're a large, well-funded organization that does humanities work, and you have staff that can go through the process of figuring out how to apply and what are the resources that you need to apply, you have an advantage. So it's a real question about how do you make that process? How do we do more training for people who want to do doing grant applications that haven't done it in the past? How do we do work to remove any barriers that we might not even be aware of? It's a process we're really just starting at this point.
Absolutely. Those are all really, really interesting points. And can you explain more on just like what like how are you making sure so within the programs that you're offering and you have people
Mhm.
with different backgrounds, is there like a specific philosophy or a specific guideline, a specific guidelines that y'all get that you go through with as well as with other organizations to make sure that everybody is being heard, being represented, and being valued? Like, has that, because that seems to be a big challenge within corporate America and within any professional company or organization, is that even though you get more people in the pipeline, it's hard to keep them there and make them feel like that they're belonged. Can you speak more on that and just what have been the milestones but also the challenges of just making sure that everybody is being heard and that the leaders of these programs are also people from different backgrounds?
Yeah, and again, I have to apologize, but having just started, I don't know that I have really good milestones on any of this yet. But I know that as we've been looking at it, part of it is also knowing who you're funding in a different way, right? Really looking at the aggregate data of where the money is going over time. And one of the things that the organization started to do right at the start of the pandemic and then has been trying to pick up again now that we're kind of in a more stable spot is as actually having better data about not only who is applying for funds and who's getting it, but also what communities those organizations serve. So this was something that was started and then interrupted by the pandemic in terms of the work that was being done by the organization. But that's the kind of information we really need, is not only to know who is receiving the funding and making sure there's equity within that, but there's also a need to know who those different groups are serving and how do they do that. It's hard. It's not like we're an organization that's providing hundreds of thousands of dollars to an organization in grants. So it's a lot to ask of an organization for them to report back who they're serving in any kind of detailed way. We also don't want to create those kinds of barriers as well in terms of having unrealistic reporting for the funding that you've received. But it is really important, I think, for all of us as we look at where programs are happening, is who is actually part of those programs. And if there's a lot of discussion around the idea of diversifying audiences, but that has to really be done in hand with communities themselves.
Absolutely. So in terms of like making up the population of your program diverse, like how can you explain more on the outreach? Like what are your methods of outreach to try to get diverse minds, diverse backgrounds into the organization to get them involved, as well as learn from different communities how to enrich your own organization? Can you explain more on the outreach portion?
Yeah, and at the moment we're doing. I mean, this again, we're in a kind of a rebuilding phase. So we're doing. We have like all the usual ways of kind of normal distribution of information, but we're trying now to actually look more closely at what are who are the audiences that are actually getting these things. Again, it's about the data that we don't have currently. We haven't been asking the right questions, I think, in the past. So the idea that we need to understand who's hearing us and who's not, what are the absences and what are the gaps in that audience that we have. So we just don't have enough information yet about even who's really on the other end of that conversation.
Absolutely. And so with just like understanding with you mentioned that there's just not like a clear line of understanding on like who is it that we're trying to receive
Mhm.
feedback from or where are we trying to get the information. Do you think those obstacles could be maybe just like in terms of a cultural aspect on I don't need help, or is it more, or do you think that the pandemic or some other systemic issues within the community could be preventing you from just like getting the information that you need in order to understand the struggles of other people?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but what I think that you're saying is like, what's keeping us from getting the information we need, right?
Yes.
Is that a
Yes.
fair? Yeah, I think part of it is asking the right questions. I think we do surveys and we do other kinds of work, but I don't know that we actually ask the right questions or go deep enough into the conversation. I think that's really one of the things that you see is that uh, certainly every organization is pressed for time. Every organization has a lot going on. So if we're funding a small library somewhere in terms of the programs they do, how much time do they have to answer our questions about who their audience is? We can't make changes to that organization very, very rapidly. So we have to actually do that as a building process, I think. And that's a slower process about relationships between the organizations that we serve and the audiences that they serve. There's a larger kind of picture there. But that's where we want to start, I think, at this point.
Yeah, yeah, okay, okay, absolutely. And within the organizations that you work, you mentioned, like for example, public library. Can you explain more like what type of organizations you try to assist or you try to work with? Do you mostly work with public sectors such as a library or a local police station or a local public schools, or do you try to also like go beyond and try to go for rural farms and like other nonprofits?
Well, we do kind of a really wide swath. Libraries are a big group that we do a lot of work with. We run a speakers bureau for humanities programming, and it's something that's picked up by a lot of libraries around the state, and that's all over the state. But there are other points where we're starting to look at, can we be in workplaces? Can we provide programs that might talk about diverse issues within workplaces as one of the ways that we could really tap into different communities and where they are currently and what they're interested in right now. We also do work with some work with schools, although that's been an area that we haven't done as much with in the recent past. But that's an area I just got off a call with a program around ethics within schools. So there's all these different areas, and part of our I think challenge is figuring out how to think about it as a large network of people that are serving a diverse set of communities all around the state, and really try to bring that information together in a way that we can see where we can best add the support that New Hampshire Humanities brings.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are all really, really interesting perspectives. Like I wanted to ask more like what do you think are kind of like the biggest resources that you use in order to educate the public and like local communities, because it seems like you're doing a lot of outreach and you're trying to receive enough feedback in order to enrich your program. But what are some tools that you're using in order to educate the public that these are important matters and that we should be coming together as a community in order to move forward?
Well, in the past, we've relied on community partners a lot for that kind of discussion. You mentioned when we were talking before and our emails back and forth, the idea of how do you bring out difficult conversations, and the way we usually do that is by supporting programs. There was a program that we were involved with called Elephant in the Room, which was a theatrical production that was about the opioid epidemic in the state. And what we were able to do was actually move from the production into a dialogue within the audience with that. So we really rely on our partners to bring the issues forward, and then we really provide the tools and the resources to then deepen that conversation within the community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Michael. So we are at time. Is there anything else that you would like to say to our audience before we depart?
No, I'm as I said, I'm new to the state, and what I'm looking forward to is hearing from different communities within the state and about what their needs are and how New Hampshire Humanities can be involved. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us this week, Michael, on NHLN Opinion Plus. And join us next time for another episode. For more information about our discussion today, check out our website at nhllatinonews.com. Follow us on Twitter at NHLatinoNews and our Instagram at NH_Latino News. I'm Bron Zapata with NHLN Opinion Plus, and we'll see you next time.